What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. One way of defining emotional sobriety is that emotional sobriety helps us transcend emotional dependence or emotional dependency towards self-support. So we move towards the ability to support ourselves, to stand on our own 2 feet, to act on our own behalf without acting against other people. You see, that's the exciting part of what's happening in our growth and development, is that as we mature, we go from this environmental dependence and being dependent on environmental support to self-support. And it's so exciting because that's the quest, right? That starts off so early in our life. As soon as we're born, we're moving towards supporting ourselves, and it continues on. The difference is that emotionally, it is not instinctual. You know, our development is wired to move us towards becoming what we can be. You don't have to tell a child around the age of 1 to start to crawl, or crawling usually begins before that, but to crawl and then pull yourself up and learn how to walk. The child wants to do that. That desire is innate. It's born within that child to unfold according to that child's potential and the possibilities, right? To move towards wholeness. That's what we're wired for. Well, we're wired to do that emotionally and spiritually too. But emotional development and spiritual development require a good midwife, right? Somebody that's going to help us move along those lines. Now, our families have been given the job of that in our culture. And unfortunately, they can only do that job with the tools that they have, with the level of emotional maturity that they've achieved, is what they're going to be passing on to us. And it's never enough. So you heard me say many times, we are victims of victims. They can only pass on what they have, and it's never enough. And that's where our job comes in, right? Is to grow ourselves up the rest of the way. They took us as far as they could. Now, guess whose job it is? Mine. I need to carry that ball the rest of the way. If we use a football analogy, now it's handed off to me, and it's my job to see how far I can advance the football on this field of life. So that's what we've been talking about. And lately, we've finished a discussion of the 12 steps. And for the last, I think, 7 Thursdays, I've been exploring a concept that I think is so critical to understand in relationship to emotional sobriety, and that's differentiation. A concept that we talked about that was brought into psychiatry by Dr. Murray Bowen. And as you hear me talk about it, you'll see why I believe understanding that concept is so important for us as we continue this journey on achieving emotional sobriety in our lives. One way of thinking about it is that movement, right? Is that movement from an undifferentiated self, where we are completely dependent on our environment, to a more differentiated self, where we're now able to take care of ourselves and to act on our own behalf. And like I said, without being in conflict with someone else. Now, this discussion has recently turned to talking about how autonomy is related to this differentiation. So we left off last time talking about some concepts of autonomy that I've taken from Dr. Nathaniel Branden's work, specifically from his book, The Psychology of Romantic Love. So I want to go back and continue discussing some of those, and then read to you a portion of the way that Dr. Murray Bowen thought about differentiation. So in talking about autonomy, what Dr. Brandon says is that an autonomous individual is one who does not experience his or her self-esteem continually in question or in jeopardy. Now, think about that for a minute. And I ended the discussion last time with this, but I think it's a great place to start. We do not experience our self-esteem continually in question or in jeopardy. Now, remember, we're talking about autonomy in the context of differentiation. And up to this point, I talked about what low differentiation looks like and what starts to happen in the transition. So as we achieve a greater sense of differentiation, our sense of self is not on the line all the time. We don't have to be right to be okay. Another way of saying this is that we live our life with a sense of humility. There's a low focus on ourselves. We're able to acknowledge our gaps in knowledge. We're able to acknowledge our limitations. We're able to own the areas that we're ignorant in. We're able to take responsibility for our mistakes. And we promptly work step 10 in our lives. Right? That's what this looks like. So our worth, our self-worth is not a matter of continuing doubt. We have what we call a solid sense of ourself. It's a solid sense, but it's still flexible, right? We're not rigid. And I want to make that distinction between being solid and rigid. We're solid, but we're flexible within that center that we have. So the source of our approval resides within us, within the self. We're not looking to somebody else to say we're okay. You know, in so many relationships, I see people get into this, stuck with this vertical thing where they look to their partner and say, is it okay for me to be this way? And it turns into a mother may I or daddy may I kind of a deal where we're looking for permission to be ourselves all the time. Well, when you achieve this level of differentiation, you're not doing that anymore. You take your stand and your partner can say whatever they want about it. And if they got some feedback and they don't like it, you'll take a look at it and you may or may not change accordingly, depending on how you feel about it. So our sense of approval resides within ourself. It is not at the mercy, and please listen to this, it is not at the mercy of every encounter with another person. So it's not on the line all the time. There's such a sense of freedom when we reach that. Brandon goes on to say, if I don't feel lovable, then it's difficult to believe that anyone else loves me. And what's going to happen if I don't feel lovable and it's difficult to believe anybody loves me? I'm going to constantly look to you to see if I'm lovable. I want you to help me challenge this doubt I have that I'm not lovable. But guess what? No matter how much you reassure me that I'm lovable, it's never going to be enough until I work on what's keeping me from having that kind of a relationship with myself. You cannot give me something I need to give to myself. That's my job, not yours. And unfortunately, you know, I tell people this a lot. We get married for the wrong reason. We get married thinking this other person is somehow going to help us become whole. And they are, but not in the way we think they are. They're going to do it by causing trouble, not by loving us. I mean, it's the damnedest thing in the world. We all wish it's the other way, but it doesn't work that way. It goes the other way. You know, marriage becomes hell, and it's a good thing because you got to go to hell before you can get to heaven. Brian's going, I know that. I do know that to be true. So do I, Brian. Say amen to that, brother. Amen to that. When we reach this autonomy, we have a greater capacity to roll with the punches. See, that's that flexibility I was talking to you about, is we see the normal frictions of everyday life in a realistic perspective. We don't assign meaning to them and inflate their meaning to mean that life sucks and then you die. We don't become nihilistic with difficulties. What we become is challenged. And we try to go, wow, I don't know how to deal with this. This is going to be an interesting journey. I'm going to learn something new here. That's what happens when we face a challenge, when we're coming from this more differentiated place. We don't get our feelings hurt over trivia. So we stop taking a lot of things personally. And if our feelings do get hurt, we don't catastrophize what that hurt means. We keep it contained. We have that ability to self-regulate. And we know that this is a passing moment and that in a few days or even in a few hours, I'm going to repair myself. I'm going to get to okay, especially if I learn how to digest and process and extract the meaning of the experience I'm having or from the experience I'm having. Dr. Brandon also says this, no matter how passionate devotion and commitment we have in a relationship, autonomous men and women may feel towards the one they love, there is still the recognition that space must exist, that freedom must exist. Sometimes aloneness must exist in the relationship. But you see, if we're differentiated, then we constantly demand and expect togetherness. We don't appreciate the two poles of togetherness and separateness. Where in a healthy relationship, separateness is experienced as a dimension of connectedness, not a disruption of it. I will say that again. Separateness is experienced as a dimension of our connectedness, not a disruption of it. But when we're undifferentiated, if we're separated, I feel threatened that you're abandoning me. I start to get anxious. Oh my God. And what am I going to do? My anxiety is going to mobilize me to control you, to try to restore my balance, thinking that I need you to be in a certain kind of relationship with me for me to be okay. Well, when we get to that level of differentiation, we don't have that idea anymore. There's a lot of room in the way that Dr. Kempler used to say it, that in a healthy relationship, there's room for two people. There's room for you to be yourself and room for me to be myself. You're not in that relationship to live up to my expectations. I'm not in this relationship to live up to yours. And yet we can find a way to meet where we both honor each other's integrity. And when we do that, our relationship is based on I want to, not I need to, or have to, or should, or supposed to. Obligation goes out the window. So when there's room for two, we do what we want to do because we want to do it, not because we should or have to or are supposed to. So it's very important to keep this idea that separateness is a dimension of relatedness, not a disruption of it. So what this looks like is that as our differentiation, as our consciousness of freedom develops, that we experience love in a very different way. When we're undifferentiated, we have what Erich Fromm called an immature love. I love you because I need you. I love you because I can't exist without you. I love you because life has no meaning without you in my life. Sounds like I'm ready to write a love song, doesn't it? Because that's what most of our love songs sound like. They're based on dependency. See, in our culture, we fuse dependency and love, because we are not operating in a culture based on wisdom. We've got a lot of maturity to do in our culture. There's no question about it. As we mature, as our differentiation increases, love now takes on a more mature shape and form. And now I want you because I love you. There's no need in it. I don't need you to be in my life. I want you in my life. I enjoy you. I'll be okay if you're not here. I'll miss you and all that stuff. But I don't need you to be here for me to be okay, for me to be whole. So Erich Fromm defined that love as union with the preservation of integrity. So really take that in for a minute. It's union with the preservation of integrity. You can't have union with the preservation of integrity without having autonomy, without being differentiated, without having a differentiated self. Well, I said to you I wanted to read something that I just was looking at before we started today, and I just wanted to tell you what happens as we start to move along this lines of being differentiated. This is Dr. Murray Bowen and Michael Kerr in their book, Family Evaluation. It's a textbook for therapists, but they say most people want to be individuals, but not everyone is willing to give up togetherness or to give up the togetherness required to achieve more individuality. So take that in for a second. We're not willing to give up because you see, as we move towards that individuality, now there's separateness and togetherness, not just togetherness. And when we're undifferentiated, that feels like a threat. People frequently are willing to be individuals only to the extent that the relationship approves and permits it. Tell me it's okay for me to be myself, then I'll be myself. But if myself depends on you and giving me approval to be myself, I'm not myself. I'm still dependent on your approval. Giving up some togetherness does not mean giving up emotional closeness. Please hear that. Giving up togetherness does not mean we give up emotional closeness. It means that one's functioning becomes less dependence on the support and acceptance of others. Some degree of rejection predictably occurs when someone embarks on a direction for oneself that is not approved of by one's spouse, by one's partner, by one's family. The rejection, which is triggered by the threat to the relationship balance, is designed to restore the balance. See, so if now when you change, if I'm in a relationship with you and you change, now I become threatened. I get anxious, right? And so I'm going to try to get you to be the way you used to be. So why are you doing that? That's silly. Or I'll criticize you for it or whatever, and all of these are my unconscious attempts to get you to be back to the way you were. This is why when we start to make these changes, it's going to disrupt our relationships. And we need to be able to, first of all, calm ourselves down, quiet our mind, calm our hearts down when that starts to happen, so we don't get caught back into restoring the old balance of our relationships, and that we allow the relationship to be out of balance until the new kind of homeostasis is achieved. So change isn't always welcomed with open arms. Let me put it that way. It creates a disruption, especially in our relationship. When someone attempts to be more of a self in a relationship, the absolute predictable response from importance to others is, you are wrong, change back. And if you don't, here are the consequences, right? In fact, If such responses do not occur, one's efforts to define more of a self are probably inconsequential. Meaning, if you're really not doing it for the right reason to be yourself and you're doing it to manipulate others, it's not going to work. So when we commit to differentiate ourselves, we differentiate ourselves not to get others to change, not to get others to be different, but for us to be different. So I thought I would add that piece in, is that as we are on this journey, it will be disruptive to our relationships. We will end up having struggles because we are upsetting the balance of things. And that's okay, because you've heard me say before, trouble does not mean something's wrong. Trouble means something's right. And that trouble is here to help us learn how to hold on to ourselves when others are pressuring us to be different. Okay, so let me invite my dear friend Roger is back tonight, and I'm so glad to see him and that he's feeling well enough to join us. And I haven't seen yet, but there he is, the one, the only, Tom Rutledge.
Hi, hey guys.
Hey,
Good
Tom.
evening, gentlemen. Good evening.
I'm glad you're feeling better, Roger.
I am indeed. No migraine headache this evening. So glad to say it. So, Tom, any thoughts? Is Herb with us tonight, or don't think so? Okay. No. Tom, any thoughts you want to start us off with?
Well, I'll say, I'll emphasize, be patient with yourself when we're looking for this kind of autonomy. This is what Alan is describing is an autonomy that is, I would say, based on, I'm using myself as an example, as you know, as I made the point in here that I'll be the poster child for the undifferentiated family. It's growing up in, where is what he describes, would not be foreign to the younger version of me. It would be alien to me. It's like, I don't think I would have understood the words he was saying. It's like, it's in my family growing up, if we wanted to know how you were doing, you had to know how my mom was doing. Everybody had to, you go like, it's really like your feelings weren't even with where you are. It's like, well, I'll find out later how I'm doing, and so there, it really was not, even a question about whether we had a right to, we didn't think of it in those terms, of course, but it's like, that was, with hindsight, you look at it that way. And the contrasting thing I want to say about that is I have a particular memory during therapy where Dee Dee and I were in some couples therapy very early in our relationship. And when you're in a relationship with me, it doesn't take long to get into therapy, by the way. It just really happens pretty quickly. It's like, let's go. I want to meet the therapist. But I remember that, how sometimes you just have these memories, these visceral memories that you have in your body. And it's like it was one of the things about the undifferentiated family that I didn't have this information ahead of time. This is all hindsight, and language about his hindsight is basically when it came to anger, the way it worked is, whoever got to anger first, if whoever got to anger first got to be angry, and the other person had to be guilty. So, it was a complementary, it was a match set. It was a complementary set. So the idea is the memory I have is one time when we were sitting on our couch in our little yellow house, first place we ever lived together, I don't even remember the content of it, but I do remember Dee Dee telling me directly, because we were learning to communicate directly with each other, that she was angry. And I remember these strange words coming out of my mouth immediately after that, which would have been really bizarre to my younger self. Me too. And so in that moment, I experienced that, and it was truly the word I would use to describe it to me was it was scary, because I was breaking out of something into something I didn't know. But it was, it's and actually I'll use a term that Dee Dee uses with, she's taught me from, she calls it positive guilt. And she has a definite definition of positive guilt in terms of changing ourselves and our family rules she says, positive guilt is what you feel when you're breaking rules that need to be broken. It's like, so it's like, it's a good sign. But it's like, it's a little bit like drug withdrawal. You have to go through it to get to the other side. But I remember being really scared in that moment, but I also remember just being fascinated by that. I kind of remained fascinated ever since then. It's the idea that it's fascinating now that we actually grow up in places where it's, we don't even, in emotional spaces where we don't even know that we have the right to that there can be more than one person who's angry, because the person with anger is the one with the power, was the way I grew up with it. And but be patient with what I was saying before, just be patient with yourselves. It's like, these are huge changes, and they come in increments, and, and it's 2 steps forward, half a step back, 1 step back, whatever, go back and forth, really one of the things about being good to yourself is just let yourself be radically imperfect. And, because you don't really have a choice about that anyway. So, what I'm saying is just you might as well just go along with it, because you're going to be radically imperfect. So.
Get on board with it. I
That's
like
right.
that, Tom.
That's right.
I like that.
So that's what I got.
Thanks, man. I like that about the imperfection piece. A couple of things, Alan. I thought several times is near the end of your presentation about the movie you were so enthusiastic about that won Academy Award for Best Picture, Coda, CODA, where this family was so dependent, so reliant on this young woman who could hear, unlike her other family members. And, but yet she felt the desire to be herself, right? To become more autonomous. And it was very disruptive of the family system in exactly the way you're talking about. But I just think it's a great example of what increasing differentiation looks like, and the opposition it will run into.
Yes.
And yet,
great.
If there's still love present, which there was, if there's still care and concern, both for self and others present, a way can almost always be found, in my experience.
Yep.
A way can almost always be found to honor oneself and stay connected to the other, whether it's several others, like in that family, in the movie, or a single partner or friends or coworker or whoever it is. So that movie exemplifies the challenges that happen, the disruptive nature of differentiation in a family system. But they did arrive at a new homeostasis, exactly as you were talking about, Alan, where they were eventually able to be supportive. Because if you think about it, a love that only limits another person in the loving relationship isn't much of a love, right? And that I emphasize that theme a lot when I'm working with clients. In my own life, I look at it that way a lot. It's like, God, how selfish am I being in those moments where I insist the other person make my needs their priority, right? And yet when they're not doing so, I'm perceiving them as the one who's being self-centered. Right. And I'm all pissed off with them. Yeah. And it's so hard, especially if it's something I really want, or from my perspective, really need. That's when it's so easy to become extremely self-centered, but to have no awareness whatsoever that I'm being extremely self-centered.
Which is it's so true though, Raj, isn't it? We're demanding that they love us. Yeah. And that they quit being selfish. And at the same time that we're doing that, we're the ones that are being selfish and unloving.
Yeah,
it's like the Barney Fife yelling, "Nobody panic!" As he panics. It's like it's the twist on that is just amazing. Yeah, I love that.
So, and the other thought I wanted to share, I had several of them come up, but I encourage myself, I encourage everyone listening to start with small challenges regarding differentiation. A situation where, there's a group energy around going to a particular place for dinner. I'm in the mood for something else. can I speak up in that situation? Not to demand what I would like to have happen, but just to express what I would be interested in. And oftentimes those situations can be difficult for us, depending on, what our own level of differentiation is. In another situation, it might be me extending myself toward another person, or even trying to be of value to another person that I might hesitate to do. But if that's what I really want to do, then that would be the expression of differentiation. So it's not always about going against the grain. Sometimes it involves extending myself toward others. But the key piece is, am I honoring myself and staying connected in the relationship? That's, as Eric Fromm talked about it, union with the preservation of integrity. It's not easy, but my experience over and over again, especially in the more recent decade or so of my life, is that almost always there's a way. Never a perfect way, okay? Never a perfect way, but there's almost always a way for me to be able to express myself, express what I'm feeling, express my reaction. Certain things are very helpful if I do it, where I take responsibility for my reaction. If I do it where I'm not blaming myself or others, certain using I statements, et cetera, right? Certain things can really help that happen, but there's almost always a way for me to include myself, as Alan likes to talk about it, and include the other.
Well, and Roger, struggles. One of the things that you said there too, I just want to point out, because when your description of when you you try these smaller challenges, the other common thing that's always there, if I tell me if I've got this right, it's always going to involve a risk.
No matter how small it is.
Yeah, but it may not feel, but a small, what may feel like, but the reason we don't do it is because we may think we may be judging ourselves as a small risk. But what you're also saying is, no, if it's difficult, if you feel that this is difficult, it's not a small thing. Give yourself credit. It's like, no, I mean, the idea, I'm such a picky eater. I mean, you use that example. I'm just going to go concrete on it. For me to speak up when somebody wants to go to some fancy schmancy restaurant that Didi's with me, she'll just tell people if they have sauces, he's not going. It's like they have to have fries. It's like, but it's like for me to actually speak up, and I've probably done this with you before, Alan, and it was even difficult with you just to say when everybody's going out. It's like, well, I would prefer to go someplace like this, and it's like, and you're right. But that was a big risk for me. Yeah.
I like that. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I just that risk. No, you didn't. Really important.
It may seem small, but it's not small.
Yeah.
Not for me individually. If I'm in your position, then the only other thing I would say that's helpful to me is to remember moments where I did experience myself as more differentiated than I typically do. To remember moments where I did find the courage to assert myself, or just like you did, I would prefer not, damn it, you better be willing to, do this or do that. But to remember moments, remember how that felt, remember what kind of language I used, remember the situation I was in.
And remember that you survived it.
And remember I survived it.
Yeah, absolutely.
To remember all of that can help give me some of what I need, especially if I'm not over challenged by a situation at this moment, can give me some of what I need to find a way to include more of myself in this situation. Thank you, guys.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.